That is, to me, the most important message of the book is that, we know ADHD presents a lot of challenges, whether it's with focus or motivation or organization. And a lot of people, especially those like me who are diagnosed later in life, can grow up with this internalized message of, laziness or disorganization or, unreliability because we don't know that there's a neurological reason behind it. And so if you can kind of switch that mindset into an understanding, not necessarily an excuse or a crutch, but understanding that if something blows up and you stumble along the way, that there's a reason for it. It's not your fault. You're not a bad person. And that we need to be as kind to ourselves as we would be to somebody else in the same situation who had the same challenges. So that for me, that was my big mindset shift. And that's what I hope people get out of the book as well.
Welcome to the Stark Reflections on Writing and Publishing podcast. There has never been a better time for writers. More information, options, and opportunities are available to you, but navigating these requires insight. Join Mark Leslie Lefebvre as he draws upon more than a quarter century of experience as a writer, a bookseller, and a trusted book industry consultant to explore and reflect on the writing and publishing landscape to help you make informed choices on your writer journey.
Hello, Reflectives, and welcome to episode 476 of the Stark Reflections podcast. This is your host, Mark Leslie Lefebvre. In today's episode, I have an interview with Nicole Bross. Now, Nicole is a certified book coach, editor, and the author of A Novel Approach, Strategies for ADHD Writers, a writing guide for neurodiverse authors whose ADHD is getting in the way of finishing their books. As a neurodiverse writer herself, Nicole is excited to share the strategies and tools she's developed with others. So we talk about this book, we talk about the fiction she has written, we talk about her writing life in general, her typewriter collection, and so much more. And that's coming up later in this episode. But first, let's hear a word about this episode's sponsor. If you're a Canadian author, you may be interested in Toronto Indie Author Con, coming up April 19th and 18th, or 18th and 19th, 2026, in Toronto, Ontario, downtown Toronto, at the Toronto Reference Library, right off Yonge Street, right in the heart of downtown Toronto, or the center of the universe, as many of the rest of us like to think of Toronto. Topics at Toronto Indie Author Con 2026 include author branding, hooking your audience from scene one, strategies for selling in person, building secondary income streams, getting fluent in Facebook ads, working with influencers to boost your reach, marketing beyond the algorithm, marketing wide beyond the US, understanding contracts, and so much more. Speakers this year include Mallory Cooper, Takiri Hirath, Andy Peliquin, Zoe York, Michael Chatfield, J.F. Garrard, Eve Silver, Dao Wong, and many more, including little old me. You can check it out. Tickets are still available over at torontoindieauthorcon.com, and that's Toronto Indie Author Con, April 18th and 19th, 2026. Hopefully, we'll see you there. Okay, and playing catch up on some comments from recent episodes for over on YouTube for episode 444, Book Marketing Made Easy with Manuscript Report. B.R. Dexter said, I just got my manuscript report and book Bible, etc. I went for the whole package, and I've been massively impressed. Well, I'm so delighted to hear that. And that's a reference to, if you go to manuscriptreport.com and you use the code MARK10, you can save 10% off. Great marketing help. They've been a sponsor of this podcast with that affiliate code as well. Also on YouTube, Lily Bloom said for an episode with Johnny B. Truant, and I've lost the number of that episode, but it goes back a few weeks. Lily said Johnny B. Truant is awesome. I'd love to meet him. He offered so much great advice, and he just seems a genuinely lovely, interesting person. And I can attest to the fact because I have met him in person numerous times over the decade or two that I've known him. He is a great guy, genuinely lovely, genuinely interesting, and yes, he's chock full of amazing advice. And he can play the guitar too. Also, Sylvie Soul said, not for an episode, but for a silly video that I posted on my YouTube channel making fun of the McDonald's CEO, for taking that microbite of the Big Arch Burger. In response, I did a CEO of Stark Publishing having some of my recent books for lunch. Just, because I can't help but mock. Sylvie said, I consume my books how I drink my orange juice, pulp free. So do I, Sylvie. I actually don't really consume a lot of books in that way. I consume them with my eyes, my ears, my soul, my mind, my heart. And as for my YouTube video of the publishing wide but shallow, which was the topic of last week's episode 466, I had a lot of comments. Here are some of them. SD Hudson said, this is such an important message for authors who want to go wide the right way. It's not just about distribution, it's about actually supporting every platform. Gave me lots to think about. Kaieso said, thank you, Mark. This is so helpful. I will be watching this over and over until I get all the notes. LOL. Have a blast in Ireland. Tim Gallo said, I'm an as yet unpublished author, other than my book funnel Reader Magnet. Last month, I realized going narrow with Amazon wasn't the right choice for the types of books I write, spy thrillers, and I decided to go wide. Listening to this was like being taken to church with a minister giving some harsh words I needed to hear. I was thinking wide but shallow in my approach. Now I realize that I have a lot more reading and studying to do of other platforms, but nobody promised publishing a book would be easy, so I'll embrace the homework. Delighted to hear you embracing the homework, Tim. It is a long uphill battle, and it's a long-term battle. It is a marathon. And another comment I have to say is, being right for the types of books you write, spy thrillers. When I was in a conference in Ireland a couple weeks ago, I kept hearing people say, oh, this is good in KU, and this is not good in KU, and this is good. Let's be honest here. Everything's good in KU and nothing's good in KU. It just depends. And there's a lot of luck, and a lot of it has to do with longer series where the page reads can actually come into play. So it's not necessarily the genre. It's other elements having to do with that. Just to be completely clear and completely frank, there are probably people who are doing brilliantly exclusive to Amazon with spy thrillers. In any case, as a matter of fact, I think I went one of the authors there as well, and I think have I had Tom Donnelly on the podcast? TD Donnelly? I think I have. If not, I guess I should. He's a funny guy. Also for that episode, Dan Redwater, or J.K. Swift, said, thanks for this, Mark. I've tried the wide train several times over the past 15 years, but this time I'm really trying to do it right. I just got so sick of being wholly dependent on one store. Oh, I feel you, Dan. I feel you. That is a scary thing to be dependent on a single entity. And also for that episode, Kennedy Ford said, as someone who is currently writing their first novel and doing research on publishing ahead of time, this is really making me rethink a lot of my previous initial observations. Thank you for giving us your knowledge and expertise on this subject. Well, you are welcome, Kennedy. And I'm so glad that resonated with people. And again, this is a reminder that this is not necessarily completely new content. It's things I've been saying all along. I've written in multiple books and so many articles and essays and interviews I've done over the years. But I felt it was necessary to compile a lot of that information into that post that I put on Substack, into that episode that was episode 466, and also into a video of me basically reading that article, which is what you got in episode 466 as well. So again, audio, video, text, different ways that people consume and absorb information. And if those comments aren't enough of a reminder that chances are, and this goes back to a Substack article I had posted and talked about in previous episodes, most people have never seen the stuff that I've produced. So even though it feels like I'm repeating myself, sometimes it bears repeating, because sometimes people don't hear it or aren't ready to hear it at certain times, or they hear the same thing again. This time they pick it up, or new people come along all the way through. I even did an experiment where I reshared that article again on Facebook, and I asked people if they could comment if this was the first time they're seeing it, or the second or the third. And some people were like, yeah, this is the fifth time I've seen it. And other people, quite a few of them, were saying, no, I hadn't seen it before. So again, even though you may feel like you're repeating yourself, there's an importance in bringing that content out there. And that doesn't go for just helping other writers with content like, publishing Wide but Shallow, but that goes for the fiction and the other books that you write to inform, inspire, and entertain readers. Okay, let me pause, quick bumper, and I'm going to do a personal update. Okay, Ireland, OMG, OMFG. I absolutely loved that country, or the two countries that make up Ireland, the Republic of Ireland and Northern Ireland, because we did visit both. We spent most of our time in Ireland, in the Republic of Ireland, and I think it was by the time we were there for our second day, as Liz and I were walking along a beautiful waterfront. I think it might have been in Wexford, and just either we had just gone to a pub or just returned, we're on our way to one. I think we came to the conclusion that, yeah, I could live here. This is such a gorgeous, beautiful country. So I could go on for hours. I will try not to, but a few things. The elements and areas of Dublin, it was so interesting, reminded us of New York, of elements of New York, because you could tell. I mean, there was a huge Irish population that moved into New York City, and certain neighborhoods seemed to have been modeled after things that were there in Dublin. And very specifically, because one of the first places we went to after Trinity College was a pub, and that was the Brazen Herald. No, that's a book. Brazenhead pub, the oldest pub in Ireland, and had a right proper pint of Guinness. And we went to, I can't even count the pub. I'm gonna have to, but can't even count the number of pubs we went to in the 10 days we were there. But I was really impressed with how well some of the English and Irish pubs that we have here in Canada and in the United States, because I've been to a lot of them, how well we've modeled our pubs after the traditional Irish pub. It was so amazing to be in hundreds-year-old pubs all over the place, and just absolutely, authentically, beautifully, magically wonderful. Heaven on earth. As heaven on earth for me as being in a bookstore or library. But I was so impressed at how well we got the fake ones that we do over here in North America. But that was kind of fun. And then in Dingle, which is one of the places we went to, I was so... Dingle was way, way smaller than Halifax, but it reminded me of the waterfront in Halifax, because it was on the waterfront. It reminded me of probably a smaller city that would be in a province like Nova Scotia. And so much of the culture, so much of the way people speak, and even some of the accents, because a lot of Eastern Canada, but Nova Scotia in particular, is very Celtic sounding, and a lot of the Irish accents, you can hear that Canadian accent, or at least that Eastern Canadian accent there. And so again, we were reminded of New York City, we were reminded of Nova Scotia and Halifax, we were reminded of how we got the pubs right, and I just absolutely adored the culture. So we flew into Dublin overnight on the red eye. We spent that day in Dublin, spent that night in Dublin as well, went to a dozen pubs, and it was just before St. Patrick's Day, so it was amazing just to see how insane it was, even on the Friday before that. Tuesday, I think, the Tuesday was St. Patrick's Day. And then we'd rented a car, so getting used to driving on the left was a little bit of a challenge, but we managed. And we went down to Wexford, and just for the afternoon, hit a pub there, walked along the waterfront, and then we made our way to Cork and Blarney. So we stayed in Blarney, which is just north of Cork, took a cab into Cork and did the pubs and a brewery there, and then did the Blarney Castle. Got to kiss the Blarney Stone, and oh my God, Blarney Castle was spectacular. And the grounds, not just the castle, but the grounds, the walk around, and it had been raining in the morning, but it was fine later on, and it was absolutely beautiful there. Then we went from there up to Dingle, and after Dingle, I think we passed through Limerick, and we stopped there for lunch before we went up to the Ennis, where I was at the Ireland Publishing Show, and the Ireland Publishing Show was absolutely fantastic. It was so amazing. Actually, wanting to purchase my own ticket to go on my own. It'd be great to go back with Draft to Digital, but I just want to go there in general because I thought it was amazing, and I do want to return to Ireland. So we were there in Ennis, in the downtown of Ennis, near where the conference was. The conference was fantastic. It was just really well organized, wonderful people. Got to reconnect with people I hadn't seen in a while, and meet some new people. And it was just a really well put together show. It went by in a flash. It was just the 3.5 days there. Then we went back, got in the car, drove up to Galway, had a blast in Galway, went to a bunch of pubs, and saw a great live, lots of amazing live music and Irish style music, which was just beautiful. Because we went to some places and we're listening to, like, Garth Brooks is on the radio and Shania Twain. And I'm like, I can hear this crap back home, this country music. I want to hear music from here, from authentic music. So we got a beautiful band at the King's Head in Galway, and we were sitting right beside the stage. 2.5 hour show is absolutely amazing. Drank so much Guinness. Then we went up into Northern Ireland, went to Derry, had to check out the Derry Girls mural, had lunch at a pub there, which was great, and then off to 6 Mile Cross, where we met up with some distant cousins that Liz has never met, but had been corresponding with some of them over the years, and stayed at 6 Mile Cross, which is basically a street, which was the town, 200 people there, and visited with some cousins, and got to visit the Anderson farm, which has been in the family since 1610. And we were there talking to the cousin who's running the farm there, 10th generation of running that farm. It was just so wonderful, comparing pictures they'd had of when Liz's grandparents went to visit in 1972, and saying, well, this was me as a little kid, and that was my dad who came to Ontario and visited your grandparents. And so just really beautiful to have that connection. And then back to Dublin for the last night, because we were flying out early on Saturday morning, and I had a most beautiful opportunity to connect with someone I realized I first met online 20 years ago. When I was first writing A Canadian Werewolf in New York, I started that book in 2006. There was a podcast called The Writing Show Podcast with Paula Bernstein. And it was one of the first podcasts I listened to back in the day. There was Paula Bernstein, there was Mur Lafferty, I think Scott Sigler was podcasting back in those early days. And then shortly after that is when Terry Follis started doing some podcasting for his book, The Best Laid Plans here in Canada. But the early days of podcasting, and I was a big fan of Paula B's show, and I commented on episodes and stuff like that, and she was doing a reality program, and it was getting published with Mark Leslie. So she thought, so we're gonna talk to Mark as he prepares to write this book based on a short story of his, A Canadian Werewolf in New York. He's gonna write it during NaNoWriMo, and we're gonna follow him along. Well, it ended up being 13 episodes, because I did not finish the book in November of 2006. I got about 30,000 words done in that November. And then, as each episode, as Paula caught up with me a month or two later, over the course of 2 or 3 years, I never finished that book. I came up with every possible excuse in the universe known to man. I published other books. A kid's book I did for my godchild. I edited anthologies. I published other books. I did not get that book finished. It's just a chaotic mess. I did not finish the book until almost 10 years later. And 2015 is when I finished that book finally. And then it was about a year process with my editor of back and forth before I released the book in 2016, 10 years after I started that process. But in the process of the writing show podcast with Paula B., one of the other regular listeners, there was a lot of us regular listeners, we were, community, was Critical Mick Halpin. And he was great. He, as I was working on the draft, I would release and share updates of, here's a scene or here's some things that I've written, and I would share them with the community so we could talk about them and people could critique them. And Mick was great in offering some fantastic advice and critique. He's the one who came up with calling, you're like wondering why Michael, who's supposed to be an alpha wolf, you know, in the opening, in the scene in the novel where Gail shows up out of the blue, his ex-girlfriend shows up and says, Andrews, I know you're a werewolf, and blah, 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 blah. And Michael realizes, because it's been years since he's seen her, that he's still desperately in love with her. He falls to her knees, practically begging for her to come back to him. And that's when he sees the engagement ring on her left hand and is like, whoops, what an idiot he is. But I remember Mick saying, like, would an alpha wolf do that? And I thought about it, and I thought really hard, and that's where I came up with the alpha wolf, beta male, big city logline for that, because it's like, yeah, no, he's not an alpha wolf. He's a pushover of a guy. He's a very soft guy. He is in touch with his anima. He is not alpha by any stretch of the imagination. Maybe the wolf is, but as the man, that's part of who Michael is. So I embraced it, actually. In any case, Mick was so wonderful. I did dedicate that novel to Paula B. and Mick Halpin. But the other thing, and especially if anyone who's listening to this has read the books, is in honor of what Mick did to help me, and the Critical Mick was his nickname because he was a book reviewer, etc. And I named one of my characters partially after him. So Michael's agent, Mac the Knife Halpin, who is a hard-ass, cutthroat negotiator, the kind of agent you want in your corner, but you do not want to fight against because he will take you down, damn it. I modeled the character because a lot of Michael's modeled after Peter Parker. I modeled the character after J. Jonah Jameson from the Spider-Man comics and the movies. In that regard, Mac Halpin, constantly mocks and ridicules Michael and makes him feel like an inch high. But he is the best agent ever because he will always get anything he wants for his agent. So he's fantastic, but he belittles Michael all the time and mocks him, and he's just a real crass, tough guy. Yeah, you learn a little bit more about his character as it goes on. You understand there's more depth to him, but modeled after sort of Monty Burns, J. Jonah Jameson, and Mick couldn't be further from that. He is, yes, he's funny when he's critical, and I love that about him, but he is a great guy. He is a funny guy, and Liz and I got to meet up with him because he lives in Dublin and has lived in Dublin since he was about 19 or 20 years old. And so I actually thought he grew up there, but I realized he grew up in the U.S., but then moved to Dublin. Met with Mick and his wife, Carmel, and the four of us had a few rounds of pints at a British pub that they love visiting because it's authentic and there's not as many tourists in that one. And it was absolutely amazing to get to meet Mick and to have a pint and a little sláinte together was so amazing. Great guy. His wife was amazing. And like my partner, Liz, Carmel's in education, so the two of them hit it off like bandits. It was fantastic. So the women were talking, and Mick and I were talking about books and writing and stuff. He's a writer as well, and has got some back burner projects. I understand back burner projects, and it was absolutely a fantastic experience. And that's not even the tip of the iceberg of how amazing Ireland was. I do have to say, though, I did a lot of research on Ireland for the Ellie's character, the fairy that Michael ends up befriending in Only Monsters in the Building. And there was a lot of turns of phrase. I was really learning from Jeff Elkins, the dialogue doctor, really researched, because there was a lot of different voices in the therapy sessions of all the characters, and I wanted to be very, I've made the mistake of everyone sounds like me, so I wanted to make it very clear who was speaking. You didn't even have to get the dialogue tag to know who was speaking. And so with Ellie, because she spent quite a bit of her childhood in Ireland, I have her using slang, Irish slang, and one of them is "come here to me," is something that people in Ireland say, and it's a thing you say when you're about to share gossip or you're about to tell them something really kind of important. So it's kind of like lean in a little bit. I'm going to tell you this, and I was Liz and I were at this bar one night, as every once in a while we're at a pub, and this guy was there, a local was there, and we were talking about rugby and football and all the games that were on the telly. And it was hilarious because at a certain point he's telling me something, and then he goes and he kind of like grabs my shoulder and he goes, "Come here to me." And it was just that phrase where he was about to say something, controversial or share some gossip and whatever. And I was like, "Oh my God, I've actually heard this in the wild." That was mighty crack. Which is another term as well. So it's so cool to hear the phrases that I researched and built into this character of Ellie. And again, while I was there, I was trying to research because I need to do more with the character for the forthcoming novel. So looking at where in Ireland was Ellie from, and we visited a lot of places. So much fun, and I guess I did go on for a long time, but hey, it's my podcast. I can go on if I want to. You can always just hit that little skip forward button anytime you want to. But you don't have to if you're waiting for this awesome interview with Nicole, because I'm going to take a breath. We're going to play the bumper, and then you get to hear this really fantastic interview with Nicole Bross. Hey, Nicole, welcome to the Stark Reflections podcast.
Thanks. I'm excited to be here.
Well, I'm excited to chat with you. So we're going to be talking about, you've got a book called The Novel Approach, Strategies for ADHD Writers, a writing guide for neurodiverse authors. Before we get into talking about the book, let's get a little bit of your background.
So, I mean, I've been a writer pretty much my whole life. I started writing, short stories and things like that, in grade school, really kind of self-insertion mysteries. I was reading like a lot of Nancy Drew and Hardy Boys and stuff like that. And I
Was
loved
it suddenly
stories like that.
Nicole Drew? Was that with the stories like that?
No, I never used my own name, I don't think, but they were all like kind of mystery focused.
Yeah.
And then, I did journalism in high school. I took it as a degree at Mount Royal, just here in Calgary. And I've been writing and editing ever since. My first novel was published in 2019. And now here I am with my first nonfiction title, which is something I never had seen myself doing until I did.
So how did that happen? So, you liked mystery, you liked writing a novel, stuff like that.
Mhm.
How did you migrate over into nonfiction? What was the inspiration for that?
So, when my first book had come out, I had recently been diagnosed with ADHD. And so I was doing like some guest blog posts and stuff here and there about what that experience was like for me, how I came to, come to terms with the diagnosis and then try and reframe kind of my mindset into something where it wasn't a negative, into something that I could take advantage of. And my co author, Kirsten Donaghey, had read one or two of these articles, and she had been the one who actually had the idea to write the book in the first place. So she got in touch with me out of the blue. We had never known each other before, and said, "Hey, want to write a book together?"
Oh,
And
come on,
I was
buy
like,
me a coffee first.
"Yeah, yeah, yeah." And I was like, very naively, like, "Sure, why not? Let's do it." Two neurodiverse people writing a book together is an experience, but we got there, and now here we are. So there was she had kind of recognized a gap in the market where there were books
Right.
for people, on writing, and there were books for people about ADHD, but nothing that combined them. So
Right.
that's how it came about.
So I know we're going to talk about some strategies. I have several things I want to ask about, but I'll try to keep them on track. Maybe it's my ADHD brain going all over the place at once. But so you mentioned the two of you. Now I've co-authored books with people,
Mhm.
and I've caused them issues because of the way I don't plan and the way I jump on new things suddenly, as opposed to sticking to some prescribed model.
Yeah.
And so far, none of them have killed me yet, or they've wanted to. They've wanted to. But How did you guys, what strategies did you use? Okay, you both said, yeah, this is a great idea. There's a market for
Mhm.
it. Let's do it. Nice to meet you. And
Yeah.
were you in the same I guess logistically, I also want to know, were you in the same geographic region? Did you get together or was it all done online?
It was all done online. She lives in Vienna, Austria.
Okay, so
Although she is
not close to Calgary, Alberta. Okay.
No, she is from Toronto. So she's
Okay.
Canadian, and moved to Vienna, I don't know, many years ago. So that's where she is. So there big time zone difference there.
Wow, yeah.
So we mainly talked over email. And in the
Okay.
beginning, it was this very like unformed idea of like a book. And I kind of put my foot down and I said, like, we need to build a very substantial outline and decide what topics we're going to talk about, how we're going to divide them up to make sure, we're each writing to our strengths and that it's all kind of even and fair. And so that's how it got started. And then we set up kind of a schedule where we would email each other every Friday as a measure of accountability to say, this is what I worked on this week.
Okay.
This is what I'm planning to work on next week. This is my goal. And we actually talk about that as a strategy in the book as well when it comes to people writing their own titles.
So you had the sort of the outline of what you wanted to do, and then you sort of divided and conquered and said, okay, I'll do this, you do that. So you were writing simultaneously, and every Friday you checked in?
Yeah. Yeah. And we were just writing in the same Google Doc online. So we could see each
Okay.
other's work as well and kind of make sure we're not repeating each other's advice, because there are some things
Oh,
that kind of carry over from challenge to challenge. So, yeah, it was a really interesting experience. I'd never co authored before.
that's fascinating that you did it that way. Because I have worked with co-authors where we have separate documents and then compile them later on.
Oh, okay.
And then in a spreadsheet tracked what we were doing and
Hmm.
estimated word count and then what we actually wrote
Yeah.
and then would swap after it was done. It was kind of like it almost feels like because again, I mean, writing for me has always been very much like I'm exposing something very intimate about myself.
Hmm.
I don't want someone to watch me as I'm like, you know what I mean? Because in a Google Doc, you can actually see the words flying onto the paper and you're like, yeah, magic.
Yeah, literally. And because of the time zone difference, we weren't ever writing at the same time.
Okay.
So that at least was not something that I had to worry about so much.
Okay.
But yeah, I could see what she had done the day before or whatever. And
Cool. So how
yeah,
roughly how long was that process of checking in every Friday? Like was it you're laughing. Okay. There's a story here.
years, years.
Okay.
Um, yeah, it took a couple of years.
Okay.
I think from the time that we kind of came up with the idea to the actual publication date, it was almost 3 years. And,
Really? Okay.
we both had various things going on in our lives. We both have families with children. And so there are things with that.
Right.
Um, I had actually been in a car accident and had a brain injury. So, that took some time to recover from. And it absolutely kind of affected my progress even afterwards. I couldn't do
Right.
as much as I used to be able to do. So, little hiccups along the way. We did thing, you go on vacation for a couple of weeks.
Yeah.
So the commitment was just to keep moving forward.
Okay.
No matter what kind of things got in our way, we were kind of kind and gracious to each other if we weren't always on the same
Right.
level of productivity, just so we could keep moving forward to the end.
Okay, let's talk about that kind and gracious. Is that an element that writers need to consider? Like even if they're solo, like being kind and
Yes.
gracious to themselves?
That is, to me, the most important message of the book is that, we know ADHD presents a lot of challenges, whether it's with focus or motivation or organization. And a lot of people, especially those like me who are diagnosed later in life, can grow up with this internalized message of, laziness or disorganization or, unreliability because we don't know that there's a neurological reason behind it. And so if you can kind of switch that mindset into an understanding, not necessarily an excuse or a crutch, but understanding that if something blows up and you stumble along the way, that there's a reason for it. It's not your fault. You're not a bad
Right.
person. And that we need to be as kind to ourselves as we would be to somebody else in the same situation who had the same challenges. So that for me, that was my big mindset shift. And that's what I hope people get out of the book as well as the strategies and advice to help them get past those challenges. But yeah, like be nice to yourself.
So I'm curious about a lot of people because when we were younger, we didn't know. We didn't know that this was a potential diagnosis. How important was getting that diagnosis as an adult? And you talk about that
Mm.
eye-opening thing because I remember I had Becca Syme on my podcast probably 9 months ago, and I finally did the Clifton Strengths, and she helped me understand something about I always thought about myself because I told myself, and I was told this. In
Mhm.
not that I had a poor environment growing up, I had a very good one, but I also was told, no, you're quiet and you're shy, and you never say anything, and that I learned like that's not me. But
Yeah,
I didn't
yeah,
learn that till later. I was like, why am I so outgoing when I'm supposed to be shy? It's because I didn't feel I had anything. I was high empathy. I didn't feel I had anything to offer, so I just kept my mouth shut because I wasn't
yeah.
going to bring value. And that was
Mhm.
eye-opening. So is eye-opening like to learn, oh, this is why I do that.
Yes, so much. It answered so many questions. And the only reason I found out in the first place is actually because one of my kids was diagnosed. And as we're going through this kind of testing process and reading the questions about, do you do this? Do you experience that? I'm looking at it and I'm like, that describes me
Mm.
perfectly. So that, and then I went to my medical professional if I could do the same testing. And sure enough, there it is. And I'm the type of ADHD where I'm not necessarily, super fidgety and, can't sit still or anything like that. Mine is more about distractibility and kind of inattentiveness. So as a kid, I wasn't the one jumping all around the classroom, making everything difficult for everybody else. I was the kid staring out the window, completely in my own mind and missing everything that was going on in the classroom. But because I was a bright kid, I was always able to compensate for it. So
Mm.
nobody really noticed that I was working like three times as hard as everyone else to kind of stay in that higher, level in terms of grades. And my grades were always great. There was no reason for anyone to question if I was having any challenges. But I knew, I'm always disorganized. I'm always losing things. I'm always, not paying attention and then having to catch up. And I felt really bad about it inside. So yeah, finding out that there was a reason for it and I didn't so hard on myself. Yeah, like eye opening, like eyes as wide as you can get, really. It
Wow.
completely changed everything.
Wow. So did that you written your first novel by then?
I had written it, but it hadn't been published yet when I was diagnosed. And everyone has a few novels in their hard drive that no one will ever see.
Yes.
And it was and still is a very difficult process, particularly the first draft. And I'd see other writers who were writing 3,000 words a day, or they'd go off for a weekend and come back with 30,000 new words, and I would do the same thing and I'd get like 2,000 words. um, so a lot of like comparison, like why can't I do it the way they can?
Right.
And so yeah, understanding that part about my process as well, and trying to figure out things that would maybe improve that was a big deal.
So how did that diagnosis then change the way you approached writing, or how did it help you potentially probably come up with a different approach? Because I'm assuming some of the same typical tropes of what writers should do maybe don't apply.
Mhm. Yeah, a lot of the writing advice out there is for neurotypical people. So I decided, I was going to stop comparing myself to them, first of all, and kind of look at the challenges that I have as not a personal flaw that I can never fix, but something that I might be able to work around or, find a different way of looking at it to improve things. So, one of the things that I find really motivating is word count tracking. I really like to see that number go up and see, how much I've done each day. So, I have a word count tracking spreadsheet, for example. And, just the idea of like seeing that number grow, um, and writing about my experience and that sort of thing is a big motivator for me, as opposed to just, waiting until inspiration strikes or till all the conditions are absolutely perfect for writing. which they never are.
Do you remember, was it a Canadian commercial from a long time ago saying, I will quit smoking when, and these things happen, and it just keeps getting more and more outrageous.
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
the same thing, right? I'll finish the novel when.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. When everything is quiet and when I feel in a certain mood and all these things, it's like, no, it's never going to be that way.
So what are some of the things that you wish writers, diagnosed or undiagnosed, with ADHD, that they wish that they would know, some strategies that they could potentially leverage?
I mean, first of all, again, it's not your fault. And then I guess the main thing is that those challenges that you're having do have potential solutions, and you don't just have to accept that that's the way you are. There are things that you can look at to change those or improve, whether it's productivity or motivation or consistency. There are tricks you can kind of hack your brain to think a different way about approaching writing.
Okay, cool. Awesome. And when did you release this book?
October 15th. So
Oh,
as
of
as of the time that
2025.
we're talking, yeah,
Okay.
it's been about a month since
About
it's
a
been
month.
out.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Awesome. So congratulations. That's really exciting. So listeners know it is available now. And so while we're talking about that, where can people find the book?
It's available everywhere. So as an ebook on, Amazon, Kobo, Nook, all of those places, and then as a paperback as well. It should be able to be ordered through any online outlet. Yeah, so
Awesome.
it's broadly available.
Because I know I'm a stickler for the physical, for especially when I'm
Mhm.
nonfiction. I've got a project scattered all over the desk here you can't see with
Yeah.
sticky notes and for nonfiction research, and I would imagine that's a book writers may want to highlight and make notes of so they can come back and remind themselves to be kind.
Yeah. Yeah. And one of the pieces of advice we give at the very beginning of the book is that you don't have to read it linearly. And in fact, you probably shouldn't, because not all of those challenges are going to apply to every single person. And I like that ability with a paperback to just look at the table of contents and then flip forward to the challenge, the chapter, that you're experiencing, and take that advice as opposed to just, reading it from beginning to end. And I find that's easier with a paperback than it is with an ebook. And
Way
I'm
easier.
I'm totally a hard book format person as well. There are like hundreds, maybe thousands of books in this house. And I don't read ebooks so much. It's all about the physical for me.
Yeah, there is some, especially when it's nonfiction and you need right now this information.
Mhm.
Ebooks are difficult to navigate, not as easy as a physical book.
Yeah, yeah,
As a physical, as I
yeah.
gesture. I'm flipping pages with my
Yeah,
fingers here.
is that what that is? Okay.
I don't know what I'm doing. I think I'm flipping pages, thousands of them all at once,
Yeah.
because I still have to desperately find it, and there's no appendix. So we're talking about the physical, and we're talking about physical books, and I cannot help nerd
Mhm.
out over a typewriter I see over your left shoulder. Uh,
Yes.
you do you type? Do you actually write on a typewriter, or is this a like a fun writer fetish that you have for typewriters?
Writer, I guess so. Yeah, it's a writer fetish. No, I don't type books on them. Certainly not. I use my laptop for that pretty much exclusively. When my kids were younger, though, they would get notes from like the Tooth Fairy or the Easter Bunny or whatever from the typewriter, and
Oh,
they would hop from key to key. So that was like a fun little thing that we did. Yeah, I love manual typewriters. I've got 20 of them.
wait,
This is
20.
just
There's a beautiful one behind you, but you have 20 of them.
yes. I do. Yeah, so this one is a Royal Safari. It is from around the 60s, I think late 60s. And that one actually is special because it types in a cursive font. So it's got like the fancy script instead of your
Wow.
standard like serif. And I have a bunch of different ones with different fonts, italic, serif, sans serif. I have one that types in like a black letter font ranging from 1913 all the way to I think the oldest one is like the newest one is from the 70s,
Wow.
and every color of the rainbow.
So I know it's unfair to ask a parent, your favorite child, but I mean, is there
Yeah.
if you were stranded on an island with no electricity and just paper and endless ribbon for
Mhm.
whatever typewriter, which one would you want to take with you?
My favorite one is an underwood. It's purple two-tone, so like lavender and dark kind of plum. It types in a standard font. It doesn't have a fancy one, but it's very pretty. It's actually the one that if I do, a book signing or something, I'll bring it with me as a prop so that people can play around with it, write a little message, that sort of thing.
That's so
Um,
cool.
yeah, it is my favorite. Purple's my favorite color. Yeah.
I love that. So yeah, a typewriter at a book signing, that could be a nice draw, right? When people see you, it's like, oh, look, must be a writer. There's a typewriter there.
Yeah, indeed. Yeah.
Because his laptop could be anyone.
Yeah. Yeah. No. So it is yeah, it's lovely.
Okay, so one last question about the book for writers before we get on to something else that I wanted to explore is so for a writer who has been struggling, maybe a beginning writer who hasn't yet gotten the manuscript done, and they may be wondering,
Mhm.
do I have an issue? Is there a problem? Am
Mhm.
I undiagnosed ADHD? How would you counsel them? What advice would you give to them? Maybe to either find out and then they can have a strategy, or just advice in general.
So with those people, especially if they are neurodiverse, one of the big reasons why they haven't written that book in the first place is because they feel paralyzed. It feels, like such a massive undertaking. And you think about writing a book, that feels huge and it feels unsurmountable. Like I can't write a book. I can't write 90,000 words or whatever. And so they stay in this, place of stasis where they've got all these great ideas, but they don't know how to get started. And so kind of the main advice that we suggest with that is to break it down into smaller pieces. Don't think of it as writing a book, think of it as writing a chapter at a time or a scene at a time. And then build a really, as much as you can, an outline to kind of guide you along the way so that you're never using a lot of mental energy wondering, like, what am I writing about? What's going on in this story? If you have an outline that shows you, where you start and where it ends, even if you don't know every single thing in the middle, because, no one does, I don't think, it gives you something, a goal that you're reaching toward. And it also gives you smaller, manageable pieces. So, yeah, for all of those people out there who are wondering, can I write a book? And they're thinking, like, no, I can't. It's just too much. You absolutely can. You just have to think about what a book is differently.
Oh, I love that. Thank you so much for that. So I want to dig into, so you mentioned your first novel came out in 2019, and we've
Mhm.
talked about this new book that you've co-authored and has just been launched and birthed into the world. But we haven't talked about your fiction, and so I want to give you a chance to talk about, that novel or any of the other writing that you've come out with. Because again, a book you haven't read is a new book. Who cares if that novel came out in 2019? It's new to many people.
It's new to many people. Yep, it's called Past Present. It's a supernatural mystery about a woman who can see people's past lives when she touches them, like skin to skin contact.
Cool.
And she ends up at the beginning of the story inheriting this kind of dilapidated inn and bar in a tiny town on the coast of Oregon that I made up. It's completely fictional. And her plan originally is just to go and like sell it, get rid of it, go back to her life. But she ends up, kind of loving the community. But at the same time, people are dying under mysterious circumstances. And the premise of the story is that we like as we reincarnate, we maintain some of the same traits and characteristics from lifetime to lifetime to lifetime, and we also meet the same people along the way, although the relationship might be different. In one lifetime they're your lover, in another it's your parent, or your best friend or something like that. And so she can see these patterns of behavior from people's past lives, these little scenes or glimpses that she gets of things that are going on, and so she uses that to figure out who's been doing these murders, and using those kind of clues about how people behaved in the past to identify what might be going on in the present.
Oh, wow, that sounds absolutely amazing. As I make a note for my to read list over here. Awesome. So you've got that novel, you've got the nonfiction books. Did you continue on with that character, written other books?
No, that one is just a single title. It's a
Standalone.
one-off.
Okay.
Yeah, it's not a series. Since then, I've been shifting to YA. It's kind of more what is capturing my attention. And
Right.
I was supposed to have another book published during the pandemic, but the pandemic being what it was, the title unfortunately got canceled from publication.
Oh no.
But I've continued on with YA, and I'm still in that same kind of supernatural fantasy speculative area, and I have a another new finished book that I'm hoping somebody will be interested in the
Excellent.
future. We will see.
That is really exciting. So I have to ask then. So your latest nonfiction book, is that something that you guys took into your own hands, or did you license that with a publisher?
Nope, that one is self-published, which is another first for me, first experience self-publishing. So a lot of learning going on with that as well. We've thought that it was the best approach because, traditional publication is slow. It can be years
Yes,
from
it
the
is.
point that you sign a book deal to the point where it comes out. And we thought, like people need this book now.
Right.
So why not give it a go? And it's been really great so far. It's been mostly a good experience, a lot of learning and, challenges along the way with that respect. But I think we've done an okay job of it.
Awesome, awesome. Well, this is so exciting. Thank you so much for sharing nonfiction and fiction, and your bit of your writer and typewriter journey with
Yeah.
me. Can you please let my listeners know where they can find more of you and your books online?
So I have a website on NicoleBross.com. So there's information about my writing there. I also have a book coaching business where I help other authors write their books, mainly neurodiverse people. And that one is manuscriptalchemy.com. And all of my writing is widely available, so you can pick it up anywhere.
Awesome. So just a reminder, if you are listening to this and you like what you heard from Nicole, you can actually work with her. And that's at manuscriptalchemy.com. Right? Did I get
Dot
that
com.
correct?
Yeah. Yeah. And I work with people whether they're planning their novels and haven't started writing yet, whether they're drafting, revising, in terms of editing or just supporting a revision along the way, and actually pitching as well. So kind of the whole gamut from beginning to end
Yeah,
of the
because
whole
you understand
process.
what to do. Okay, when you
Yeah.
have a manuscript, you've worked with publishers, you've gone through the highs and lows. Oh no, pandemic, we're going to cancel it because
Yeah.
only physical books exist, apparently. Uh,
Yeah.
But sorry, I mock some traditional publishers who didn't realize that they still had access to this other thing.
Yeah.
Anyways, it's okay. Digital library sales went up 600% that month, so
Hmm.
the libraries figured it out pretty quickly.
Yeah.
In any case, people can work with you, and you get it. You understand. You will probably be kind to those authors who are struggling to, as they're like, "Hey, I really want to write a book, and I want to work with someone who understands me."
Yeah, always kindness from me. I'm honest and I'm fair, but I'm not going to tell someone, that they failed or they're a bad writer or whatever.
Awesome.
And and my kind of approach is strategy based, so no one ever has to come and tell me about their diagnosis if that's not something you're comfortable
Okay.
sharing.
Yeah,
It's just, if you have this challenge, then I have some ideas for how to work around it. So
that's fantastic. Nicole, thank you so much for hanging out with me today.
yeah, thank you so much for having me. It's been a good chat.
Such a great conversation with Nicole, and definitely a novel approach strategies for ADHD writers is definitely one I'm probably going to add to my collection of books for writers. But one of the things I've already added was I already got the audiobook for her novel Past Presence because I was looking at it and went, oh, I got to get this. This looks so good as well. So lots of fun, but a few reflections is the first one was a reflection on how Nicole's co-author, so Kristen, how she reached out. She saw the articles and reached out about writing that book, and the book happened because of this. And I'm reminded of how many projects co-authored projects and other projects have happened because of that, or how many opportunities I've been given because somebody asked me or I asked them. And it's the reflection here is, if you don't ask, it's not likely you're going to get. So many books I have were because somebody asked. So many projects, so many opportunities were because I asked or because somebody asked me. And so what are you doing if you're withholding that out of the fear? Like, what's the worst thing that can happen? And I'll go back to an example of, I've known Jonathan Maybury for years. We've had meals together. We've drank together. We've sat on numerous panels together. And he's a great guy. I love chatting with him. I read tons of his books. I admire him, respect him so much. And when I was putting out a horror story collection, I'm like, well, he's known as a horror author. I'm wondering if I should ask Jonathan if he would consider blurbing it. And even though I knew him really, really well, I was scared to ask him. And so what I did is I was like, okay, what are the shortest pieces of this collection? And, is it available in audio to make it easier for him to read it fast so he can kind of get a feel for it? And he's probably too busy and he's going to say no. And I almost self-rejected. But I said, hey, Jonathan, would it be okay? I'm doing this book. I'd love to be able to get any blurb from you if you're willing. If you want, here's some things. They're really, really short. You can read. I wouldn't expect you to read the whole thing. And he comes back to me and he says, just send me the whole book. And a few days later, he emails me back and he goes, I loved it. You're twisted. And he gave me an amazing blurb. If I had not asked, I would not have gotten. Just like a novel approach, Strategies for ADHD Writers would not exist if Kristen hadn't reached out after reading some articles that Nicole had written on the topic. And the book has happened, and here's the best thing about it. I bet you that book is helping so many writers. Just like this interview that I did with Nicole has probably helped so many people. And we'll never know, but I love this about that. The other thing is related to the co-authorship. And that's the commitment they had. They worked on it for several years, but they had the commitment to always be moving forward, even if it was slow and even if the steps were small. And it's a reminder, earlier on in my extended personal update, I talked about it taking me 10 years before I finished that novel, A Canadian Werewolf in New York. But every single time I sat down at the keyboard over the years, maybe I edited something and cleaned something up. Maybe I added a paragraph or two. I was slowly moving forward bit by bit by bit. So this is a reminder to you to stop beating yourself up for not getting that thing done. Maybe you added one word, maybe you deleted a word because you were editing, but that was still forward progress. So even if it was slow, even if the steps were small, stop beating yourself up. And also stop beating yourself up. This is another thing that Nicole had mentioned in the interview is, we're so hard on ourselves when, and again, not potentially understanding that maybe we have some undiagnosed thing that is probably at the center of why we get distracted so easily, or why this project, I just squirrel out and I'm constantly jumping from project to project. Is be kind to yourself. Be patient with yourself, as patient as you would be with someone you care deeply about, because you should care about yourself. I have other things to reflect on, but I know this episode has gone on. If there's something that you wanted to reflect on from this episode, from this fantastic interview with Nicole, please share that over at starkreflections.ca or the various places where this podcast is posted. I love to hear what you're thinking about, what you're reflecting on as you're listening to the episodes, because again, it's all part of the way we're all learning together as we continue to learn, we continue to grow, and we continue to cut each other some slack and also cut ourselves some slack. So a huge shout out and thank you to those who've left comments for this episode and for other episodes, or for all the episodes and over the years. Really appreciate you taking the time. Thank you for those who have shared this podcast with other people as well. I appreciate that as well. And thank you, of course, to my patrons who support this podcast over at patreon.com/darkreflections, as well as my coffee buddies over at buymeacoffee.com/Mark Leslie. But that's it for the reflection. That's it for this episode. Thank you so much for listening, for letting me bend your ear. There'll be links to Nicole's website, etc. in the show notes at starkreflections.ca. But until next week, and until next episode, this is, as always, Mark Leslie Lefebvre, wishing you, dear listener, great writing and good Stark reflections.
Thank you for listening to the Stark Reflections podcast. You can find show notes for each episode at starkreflections.ca.
The music for this podcast, Laser Groove, was composed and produced by Kevin MacLeod. Check out more of Kevin's great music at incomptech.com.